class, this is a brief intro video to chapter 10 in the textbook, which is about architecture. And the main focus this week for your study is to study the Parthenon. And if you look at page 175 in chapter 10, you'll see some images of the Parthenon. You'll definitely want to read that section. There's also another section in the book to reference, and that's in chapter 12, beginning on page 226. So there are a couple of sections in the book relating to the Parthenon, and then I've also posted a video to a Nova episode about the Parthenon and the recent restoration, which has been going on for about 30 years and is still ongoing at the site. So once you read about it in the book and you watch that film, you'll have a pretty good knowledge of the Parthenon. So this will be a fairly in-depth study on that one building. But there are also some other structures that I want to make sure you are familiar with from chapter 10. One of those is Falling Water, which is on page 184 of the book. That's a Frank Lloyd Wright house. It's probably the most famous modern house in the world. Also, if you flip back a few pages, the Eiffel Tower, make sure you read about that. A really famous landmark in Paris. And then going forward again, St. Peter's Basilica, which is on pages 185 to 187, one of the great masterworks of the Renaissance. It's interesting because there were so many artists and architects who worked on that one structure. And on page 186, there's a series of diagrams showing you how the design for the building changed over time. And you're looking at about 170 years that it took to complete that structure. Not only the building itself, but also the courtyard in front of it, which is as big as the building. So not every pope, not every artist, not every architect lived to see its completion. So you have all of these different artists, architects who have their own specific influence on the work. So really from the beginning of chapter 10 all the way up to page 187 will be the main focus of the chapter. Another thing I wanted to point out is at the very beginning you have a series of architectural drawings and a work called the Guggenheim Museum. Now if you look in the back of the book in the index and if you look up the Guggenheim, you'll see that there are two. One is in Spain, which is the one at the beginning of chapter 10, and one is in New York City, which was designed by a different architect. So the one in Spain was designed by an architect named Frank Gehry, and the one in New York City was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the same architect who designed Falling Water. So make sure that you reference both in the book. Two Guggenheim museums, one in Spain and one in New York City. So those are the other specific works that I wanted to mention. You should have just a basic knowledge of those. So you want to have the most in-depth knowledge about the Parthenon, since we're really focusing heavily on that. A brief knowledge of the others, and then also just pay attention to the different terms that are in chapter 10 all the way up to the page that I mentioned. So it's not through the entire chapter, but just up to the few last pages. So things like barrel vault, groin vault, post and lintel, all those different terms, those will also be important to know when it comes to studying and preparing for the next exam.